Walk the Talk America presents Guns and Mental Health, a podcast for firearms owners, clinicians, and the curious public.
We are live, and today we get a little bit of a different conversation. We're going to turn the questions on to Mike today and kind of explore who he is, his upbringing, and I'm sure you'll definitely learn something you didn't know about him before the start of this show. But let's get into it. Who is Michael Sidini? How would you describe that at this point in your life, Mike?
Who is Michael Sidini? Somebody you wouldn't recognize 20 years ago. I am now the guns and mental health guy, which is I've kind of made my name now being this expert in those two fields, even though I'm not an expert in either one. So, I am the guns and mental health.
Where did it all start for you? I know there's a lot of interesting backstory between then and now, but where did you kind of grow up and what was that like?
Yeah, so historically, I've never really shared my background. It wasn't until David Yamani wrote a book where he interviewed me and we kind of did a deep dive into my background. And then I've recently done a few podcasts where people have actually asked about like my origin story and like how I got in this, because a lot of people, I think, take it straight from my start at Eagle Imports, right? The family business, nepotism. But there was a lot that happened before that. I was born in New Jersey from a single mother. Basically, I was the product. My mom was my biological father's side chick. And my father was a man named Art Stock, who was very famous in New Jersey, owned a lot of bars. He was a manager for a boxer named Chuck Wepner. For any of the listeners that may know who that is, most people are going to be like, who's Chuck Wepner? Chuck Wepner was the guy that they based the movie Rocky off of. My father was his manager. Chuck basically got an opportunity to fight Muhammad Ali, just like in the Rocky movie, where Rocky gets a chance to fight Apollo Creed, changes his life. Chuck was Rocky. And that's how Sylvester Stallone got inspired by that story. So I'm a product of kind of a dysfunctional relationship that, got out of control, which is a crazy story. But that's where I was born in New Jersey. And I have a history tied into all kinds of funny stuff. And, I guess we could dive into that. But that's where I started.
How did you make it out west? Because when we talk, you have ties to the San Francisco Giants. You and Jake bond over that positive and depressing experience at times. How did those roots get established in this kind of story and journey?
Yeah, it's always kind of funny because my West Coast people like that I grew up with in the Bay, and then I have my East Coast people, and they would say like, Mike's from New Jersey. And then when my West Coast people hear that, they're like, no, he wasn't. He's from the Bay. Right. So it's like I can kind of go in between both. But basically, when things went south between my biological father and my mother, my mom lost custody to him. And there was a whole war going on that those two had. I mean, I'm sure they were young and they were knuckleheads and neither of them wanted to lose. But my mom basically kidnapped me and we fled the country and we ended up all around the world. We were in Spain. And I came back to the United States, when I was like 6 or 7, and we landed in San Francisco. And that's where I spent most of my formative years growing up in the Bay Area. But originally, like I said, I'm from New Jersey. In high school, I went back to New Jersey. But I spent most of my life never really knowing of my father, but not having a relationship with him. And basically having a fake name and living a life on the run. So that's how I ended up in San Francisco.
Do you remember much of that time, or were you so young that there's not a lot of memories from that time until you kind of got into San Fran?
No, I do. I remember a lot of things. I remember my family and my biological father fighting like the Hatfields and McCoys. Like they hated each other. I remember a lot of running around. And, like we're having a guest on the show that's coming on the show actually tomorrow, and listening to his story, he was talking about being as a kid, exiting his house. Like a lot of people don't understand what it's like to have your mom, because his mom was on the run from her husband. She was a battered wife, and she was constantly running. And he was just like saying something like, a lot of people don't know what it's like to not have possessions or not be attached to possessions. And he wasn't attached to possessions because he was so used to picking up and moving in 2 seconds, whether it's to another state or another apartment building or something like that, because he was constantly running. I remember those things, being on the run. I remember, my mother basically coming and getting me in Chicago and saying that we got to go to Canada. Little things like that, not all bad memories though. It's kind of weird. Like when you're a kid, you kind of adapt to whatever you think is normal. And there seemed to be chaos. And to me, I always felt loved. So I never did not feel that. But at the same time, that was not normal. That's not a normal childhood. And it never became something to where like affected my life or maybe it did and I didn't know it, but there was a lot of chaos. So I had a lot of memories of that. But at the same time, like my family created an enemy, it was like having a family unit that had an enemy. And as I got older, you start to realize like there's 3 sides to every story, right? There's his side, her side, and the truth somewhere in the middle. But for the most part, I do have memories. It's not like I blocked anything out. I really enjoyed my time growing up in San Francisco. Those are some very good formative years for me. A lot of like friendships that I made. But yeah, I remember it. And maybe I compartmentalize and bury a lot of the trauma that came with that stuff. But, I kind of grew up not wanting to disappoint my mother. There was just something that always stuck with me. It's like when you see your mother crying and your mother worried, and my mother exposed me to things that I probably shouldn't have been exposed to, like things that like when I became a father, I was like, my kids are never going to feel like we're going to be homeless. My kids are never going to feel like we're never going to have money, like in terms of like enough to survive. Right. And like, I remember being a kid and like my mom wanted to buy me ice cream one time. And I remember thinking like, you just said that we're about to be homeless. Like, I don't want the ice cream. But me thinking like not understanding, at that time, probably ice cream cone cost 25 cents. Right. But like, I thought, okay, that I'm not going to contribute to pushing us over the edge. So it's like little things like that I remember.
And once you got to San Francisco, is that kind of a stable, consistent time in your life after being on kind of the move and the run all those years previously?
Yeah, I think so. To me, like I said, it was the longest I had lived in one place, and I developed some good friendships. I remember my mom got remarried to a really good guy, and life just became a little bit normal. We weren't like nomads, always kind of looking over our shoulder, but, I was able to kind of get in a routine and stay there and have these, one of my board of directors, Jose Fierro, is my lifelong friend, right? I met him when I moved to San Francisco. We've been together forever in terms of our friendship. And it's just like being able to have that. It wasn't until, the story gets kind of crazy after I moved back to New Jersey. And then it just becomes like learning about the history of the story. So the story to me is not that intriguing until you find out like other pieces of the story.
And what was it like moving back to New Jersey? Was that around high school? A little bit before high school?
Yeah. So when I was in high school and I was a junior, my mother and my stepfather got transferred to go live in Singapore. I had already moved to Singapore once with them, when I was in 8th grade, and I did not want to go back to Singapore. At that time, because of my age, and we just felt like there was no more war. So I changed my name back to Sidini, and I moved back to New Jersey to finish out my high school years in Ocean Township, the Asbury Park area. It was one of those things where everyone always said, hey, your dad might contact you. I played football, so I was in the paper. Like my name was out there, and he never did. He didn't try until later. But, that was kind of an experiment that, it's like, look, I don't want to leave the country again. I want to go back to New Jersey. And I want to like experience what I missed out on by living around some of my family members that I feel like I kind of got snatched out from being on the run with my mother.
And what did you Like, what were your joys and kind of hobbies? Was it football? What else did you enjoy doing at kind of that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I was a classic kid, man. I played 3 sports. I was a football, baseball, and basketball kid. I played video games, like everybody loved video games back then. And, I like being active. Like that was my joy in life. I really excelled out of the 3 sports in football, but I went to 4 different high schools, so I never really got traction in one area to get enough publicity. But, coming out of high school, I had a few looks at some non-scholarship schools, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to a major school and have fun. And I chose Arizona State, which was the best decision I made. I mean, I can't complain about that. But, when you go to a school like Arizona State, unless you're all American, there's no way I was going to walk on and be a tackling dummy, at a school like that. And I went to school during the time of Jake Plummer and Pat Tillman and Derek Rogers and Battle and all those guys. Like, we almost won a national championship, but I got to enjoy my college years. But, I was into everything that a normal kid was into. Like I said, I never let my crazy childhood ever get in the way of what you can do as a kid to have fun and, take care of yourself mentally, and never use anything as a crutch.
What important chapters were between graduating from ASU and the story everybody's more familiar with working in the industry and Eagle?
So after I graduated college, 98, I decided to come to work for my family, which was the family business. I didn't decide. I was pretty much told. I make a joke about it when I do the public speaking events about being a product of nepotism. I was truly a product of nepotism. They were like, look, go to school. As soon as you're done, come here, have a job. Now, at the time, I didn't realize like how fortunate I was to have that. And like how, like I tell people all the time, if you have the opportunity with nepotism, take it, right? Because you could do 2 things with it. You could destroy a business, or you can continue its legacy and build upon it, right? I wasn't ready to accept that challenge, out of college. So basically, I wasn't a gun person. I didn't really understand the nuance of guns. I didn't understand guns in general. I didn't have an issue with guns, but I was not like the stereotypical gun guy, right? And that's kind of how we play off the whole ungunned gun guy thing, is because from the first year that I worked there, I wasn't really into firearms. So it helped me, though, later in life to be able to talk to people about firearms, because I kind of understand the things that they don't understand, as opposed to like somebody who's been born into it, or they know it from day one, and their dad is telling them, how important the Second Amendment is and how the gun is a tool. And, I didn't have anybody to really do that for me. I just went right to work in the industry, had to learn on the fly. Wasn't happy. Wanted to do something to where like I made it on my own, and had to be really careful with that because didn't want to insult my family. Got lucky, ended up modeling for a bunch of years up in New York City, fell into my lap, right? And I think that was like one of the only things that could have possibly happened for me where they would have been okay with me leaving. Because when that opportunity arose, they were like, you have to take a shot at this. Like, you have to go. Whereas if I told them I wanted to go work for, say, like a real estate marketing company, which I did after modeling, they would have probably not been cool with that because they would have felt like I was leaving them. So those are kind of stepping stones for me, and we can dive into each one because it's like what made me who I am today.
Yeah, I think that's a story I don't know of. How did the modeling start?
Modeling started by me being in a club in New York City, going out, blowing off some steam. And I was approached by Playgirl magazine. Basically, they said, hey, look, we're interested in you being a centerfold. Like, if you wanted to do this, you could. And I remember like taking the business card of the guy and kind of just throwing it in my pocket and being like, whatever. And going home down in Jersey, and then just talking about it with my family, like, hey, yeah, this guy from, Playgirl reached out. And I remember like my mom saying like, why wouldn't you do it? Like, you only live once, they had that type of attitude. So I explored the opportunity and eventually took them up on the offer. But and people make fun of that whole situation. It is kind of funny, right? But I wouldn't have actually gotten into fashion modeling if I didn't do Playgirl first. So basically when I went down to South Beach to shoot the Playgirl issue, they made me a centerfold, and the photographer for the shoot had said, "Hey, why don't you do regular modeling?" And I'm like, because I wasn't really trying to do this, you know? And he was just like, when we get back to New York City, I'll take some regular pictures of you and we can use those pictures and I'll send you on castings for modeling agencies. And that's kind of how that started. You know, unintentional, wasn't pursuing it, but would have taken it if it happened, right? So I remember getting back to New York City and basically going on these open calls to these modeling agencies like Boss and IMG and just getting rejected left and right, just getting hammered. Like people like looking at my pictures and they're saying, "Oh, like, you know, you got a great look, but yeah, we're just not interested." And kind of being angry, right? Like, why does everyone keep saying I could do this? And when I go out there, I'm just getting punched in the face and rejected, and just going and going and going. And I remember like at one point I stopped to have my meeting with Boss, and Boss at the time was, and I don't know, I think my agency's still around. I'm sure Boss is still around. I don't know. I've been so far removed from that life. I don't know who the players are anymore. But at the time, Boss was huge. They had a guy named Simon Rex. They had a guy named Marcus Schenkenberg. I think they had Vanderloo. Like they had all these male models there. And it was really funny because I walked in and I got rejected. And I was kind of at my wit's end. I was just like, all right, I've been rejected by like 10 different places. Like, this is a wrap. I'm not doing this. And I was sitting in an alley and this really pretty girl walks by. And like, I noticed I had a sandwich. I had gotten a sandwich. It was windy. That's why I was in the alley. I was like trying to duck in the alley to prevent the wind. And she comes back and she like says, "Hey, like, do I know you?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Are you a model?" And I was like, "Well, not really." And she's like, "Well, you have a book." And I was like holding the book, you know, and I was like, well, yeah, I'm trying to be, you know. And she's like, "Are you going into Boss?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Don't go in there. They'll reject you." And I remember in my head, I was like, I don't want to tell her I've already been rejected. So I was like, "Oh, will they?" And she's like, "Yeah, you're probably more suited for a place like Click." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "No, I appreciate that." And she's like, "Do you know anybody at Click?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Do you want me to set up a meeting for you?" And I was like, "Sure." And I remember like she took one of her checks that had like her name and her address and her phone number on it. And she handed it to me and she's like, call me later. I'll set something up for you. You know, and she took down my name and I was like, cool. So I walk out and, you know, I go to the next whatever appointment I have, get rejected again, all this, you know, it's the same old story. And later on that night, I was with the photographer from Playgirl and I told him about the encounter I had with the girl. And he was like, "You should call Click and see if, you know," she had mentioned, "I can set you up with my friend David. David is a booker at Click. You should call him, or, you know, I'll call for you and then call him." But my my photographer from Playgirl was like, "Call there and see if there's even a David." So I called Click and I asked for David and he's like, "Speaking," and I hung up, right? I was like, "Oh, there's a David." But she ended up hooking up a meeting for me. And it's crazy because that night I had gone to like a house party in the city and I randomly ran into a guy from my high school who was a big time model, him and his brother. And they were like, "Hey dude, what are you doing up here?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm trying to do the modeling thing." And, you know, I joked around. I was like trying to be like you guys or whatever. And they're like, who are you going to go talk to? And I was honest. I told them like all the places I went to. And I was like, "But I have a meeting with Click tomorrow." And he was like, I remember this guy, his name was Steve Brown. And he was like, "Click is where all the guys from Ocean Township are, you know, that's our agency. Like, that's the agency that we all came through." And he's like, "Who are you meeting with tomorrow?" And I was like, "David." And he's like, "Tell David I said hi." He's like, "Tell him Steve Brown and you know, says hi." And I was like, "You don't care if I name drop you like that?" And he was like, "No," because I barely knew Steve. You know what I mean? And it was like, so it was just, it fell into place. It was all coincidental. And I remember like going into the Click office in Manhattan and meeting with David and then him saying like, "Who else are you talking to?" And I completely lied. And I told him that I was talking to Next, Boss, all these other agencies. And he was just like, "Yeah, we'd be interested in signing you." And I remember him asking me, he's like, where are you from? And I was like, I'm from Ocean Township, New Jersey. And him going, Jesus, like, what do they put in the water there? Because there was like 4 major models before me that had come from my high school. So it just worked out, man. It was one of those crazy, like, plucked out of nowhere stories that, you know, everything fell into place. And the craziest part about this story is when I talked to David and he was like, hey, who is the girl that called to set this meeting up? And I was like, she says you're her friend. And he's like, I have no idea who she is. And I remember he's like, let's call her. And he called her phone and it went to voicemail. And he said to her, he's like, hey, whatever, like, I just want to thank you for sending Mike in. I think we're going to work with him. You know, call me, let's get together. And he hung up, but he's like, I have no idea who that is. Right. And it's weird. So on the train ride home back to Jersey, I called her and she picked up and I told her how the day went and how everything was. And she's like, cool. And I was like, you should call David. Like, I didn't want to say like, he didn't know who you are. You know, I was just very thankful. But I remember I asked her, I was like, listen, can I, you know, next week, can I come up to the city and take you out to dinner to say thank you? You know, not only just because I wanted to thank her for everything she did. I mean, she was beautiful. So like, I literally was like, okay. She's like, yeah, just call me the next time you're in the city. All right. And in a week, I call her and the phone doesn't work. It's disconnected. Like, so I never even got a chance to like thank her or help her. But that's how my modeling career started, was just a series of like misfortune and then meeting a complete stranger in an alley. And then, you know, being lucky enough to run into Steve and Ray Brown that night. You know, it just was like, you know, I'm not a religious person, but I am kind of spiritual, and it's just like everything lined up perfectly. But it's almost kind of like the Walk Talk America story, if you think about it, right? You meet a complete stranger and have this conversation, and then your whole life changes. It's the same thing that happened to me for modeling.
It's interesting that you start that story with, I wanted to do something that made my family proud and let me get away from the family business. And that was modeling for Playgirl was the answer, not marketing for real estate. Nope. Male modeling for Playgirl.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was male modeling. It wasn't Playgirl. It was modeling. So like the Playgirl thing was more or less go do Playgirl, but you're still working here, because that's a one-shot thing. So like it was me leaving to model. It was taking a shot at the modeling career. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. It wasn't, hey, my guy, because you don't get rich from Playgirl. You really don't get rich from Playgirl. Like you make peanuts off Playgirl. There's a way to make money off Playgirl when you're a centerfold, but I wasn't going to do that. Like I wasn't going to work at Chippendales, or I wasn't going to, you know what I mean? Like, but with the modeling thing, that was an opportunity for me, you know, I mean, for them, it's like seeing me in magazines, like that equated to something, like you made it somewhere, you know what I mean? So just take a shot at it. And it was cool, right? Like it was, not everybody can say that they did what I did or had the experiences that I had. And my family appreciated that. And they afforded me, you know, the luxury to be able to kind of chase that dream for however long it lasted, right? 3 years. So, you know, they were supportive. Now, they weren't supportive when I wanted to come back to work for them. So I ended up having to go into a separate industry after that, which was the best thing that could have happened, because I went to go work for somebody who basically was no nonsense. He became my mentor, and I learned a lot about business and marketing and things like that. Not marketing in the sense of I could be you, Kevin. You know what I mean? No, but like just understanding the game. So I was able to come back to Eagle Imports in my mid-20s and be able to contribute to things that I never would have been able to contribute if I would have just stayed a glorified secretary, young kid coming up through nepotism. You know, I was able to they would always given me passes, my family. You know what I mean? You know, they yelled at me and things like that, but I could have just been a clown, you know, employee, like as many kids do when they're kind of handed something. So like for me being able to escape and do the modeling thing and then go, you know, figure out what I was going to do with my life after the modeling thing, and I couldn't just run home, was the best thing for me to come back a few years later.
What were your favorite days on the job of either modeling or that second stop after marketing?
So the modeling thing was just the accomplishments, like the days on the job were, I always tell people this all the time. Like when you are getting paid to do something to show up and like, you're working with, say, like a Karl Lagerfeld, who was very kind to me. And for those of you who are listening that have no idea who Karl Lagerfeld is, he was a fashion designer for many, many years. If you Google him, he was very instrumental in my career because he used me over and over again. I was very lucky to have a friendship with someone like Carl and have someone back me, like that. Like, flying to Paris and having that experience and shooting with somebody like Carl, a lot of people would do that for free, right? Like, so there are just times in life when you find yourself in situations and jobs where you're like, this is insane, right? Like I was the History Channel guy on the billboard, the big H, and just driving into New York City and seeing yourself on a billboard, like representing History Channel. Like those are things that like I said, you do them for free. You can't do them for free forever. And you start to get agitated when people ask you to work for free. But that was a lot of the like fun stuff. Right. Living in New York City in the late 90s, kind of being able to move around the city with an agency behind you and the parties and all that stuff was really memorable. So all these crazy memories. Now, the second chapter of my work experience working for a real estate marketing company, that was awesome because it was a startup company. And to me, like being able to see a major company be built from the ground up day one, that's an experience that a lot of people don't get. Like how many people can, they're out there, but how many people could say like, I started when it was a concept and I was here when we owned a building. You saw it grow that much. That type of lesson, like there's no college that can teach you that. That information is just so valuable, like if you have that experience. So I would say like that for the second chapter of my work life.
When you came back to the family business, did they make you start at like the low man on the totem pole doing all like trade shows and that, or where did you kind of fall when you came back?
Yeah, I mean, you start as, I came out as the low man on the totem pole. And when I came back, I was pretty much the low man on the totem pole. But when I came back, they trusted me a little bit more with traveling because I had done that with my previous job working for the real estate marketing company. So, I was basically what they call in the industry a glorified sales rep, traveling around the country, meeting with distributors and gun dealers, calling on them, making sure everything was copacetic, like everything's good, getting your orders in, that type of thing. So it was a little bit of a hybrid of sales and, doing the conventions and things like that. We weren't that big, we did big numbers, but we were, there was only like 8 of us. So, a lot of people had to wear different hats. And even when we became president of my own company, I still wore a lot of hats. I mean, we all did things that, answering phones to making sure the water cooler's filled up. Like, there's things that we all do. And that's a great experience in itself as well.
What during that time do you think was kind of the crucial experience you gained that helped you have success with WTT?
I think the most important thing is that I understand how the game works and I understand how things are difficult. And so I'm going to give you an example of that. Calling on dealers as a sales rep for my family's company made me appreciate how difficult the guy behind the counter day is, right? Like, so you think of a gun shop and like that store owner has employees and they're on the front line. They're working the counter and they have to deal with guys like me coming in. They have to deal with customers. They have to deal with the people that just want to go into gun shops and talk, right? We equate it to like, it's a barbershop. Like people like to go in there and just talk, right? They got to look for straw purchases. They got to make customers happy. They got to take the daily call that comes through from every distributor. There's about 15 distributors and every one of them has a deal of the day. Is trying to sell product, right? So being able to understand like that there's a lot of responsibility for a guy behind a gun counter, which a lot of people will think, well, How hard is it? No, it's not easy. You know what I mean? That has helped me, and it translates into Walk the Talk America, especially when I'm working with suicide prevention and better mental health organizations, right? Mental health or behavioral health organizations, to make them understand how this industry works and who the players are and how difficult it is. You can't just assume that every guy behind the counter is going to be a good candidate to talk about mental health, you know? So I think that that's where that helps the most. Like having insider information about how the industry works and how everything works, even when it comes to purchasing a gun, right? I can correct a lot of the misunderstandings that people have because of the media. You know, when people say like, oh, it's easier to buy a machine gun than it is to check out a library book, or, you know, little silly things like that. I've been able to have those conversations without getting emotional. And then how are people going to challenge me? Because that's how I grew up. You know, that's how I came up professionally, was understanding how the business actually works, understanding the relationship between the manufacturer and, say, an organization like the NRA. You know, everyone always likes to say, well, all the manufacturers are the NRA puppets. That's not true. Like, every time someone has said that in front of me, I say, tell me how. Like, explain to me why you think that. And of course, like, when they understand who they're talking to, and I can kind of crush that myth, you know, they're apt to listen because I know what I'm talking about.
I'm sure the listeners have heard the story of the chance meeting in Louisiana, right? And I think we'll get there, but where were you in kind of life around that conversation that kind of set you up for your mind to be open and for you to jump at this new adventure?
Well, you know, if you go back to the history of suicide and Eagle Imports, right? Losing the president of my company and my dear friend, William Strominger, Bill and I had many discussions about suicide and how that is a major issue with firearms and how we could never discuss it. And when he passed, you know, we did the typical thing that everybody seems to have done in the past in the gun industry up until, I think, now we're starting to understand that we need to be more involved and we need to have like a well thought out plan for when these things happen, and we don't have to just like sweep it under the rug and keep it moving. You know, I always wanted to do something, and I never looked at myself as like a 2A advocate. I certainly didn't look at myself as somebody who's a mental health expert. But when that question was brought up to me, just seeing a glaring hole that we didn't have, like, as society, right? The fact that the gun industry does not work hand in hand or talk to the mental health community or the behavioral health community or the suicide prevention community, it just seemed like a great opportunity. And I'm going to be honest, like in the beginning, I just wanted to throw money at the problem, right? I thought, okay, I'll go to the Rugers and I'll go to the Glocks and we'll raise the money and then they can fix the issue. And to me, I was kind of looking at it as more of like a PR play. Like, I would have never in a million years thought I'd be where I am now, where I'm like, I don't need the mental health community to accomplish what I want to reduce suicide and negative outcomes of firearms. They can help me. They can advise me, but Walk to Talk America doesn't need anybody. So like, that's a complete reversal of where I thought we would be. Right. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way at all. Like, I respect a lot of people that work on that side, but I just see the potential that the firearms community and the firearms industry has to be the leaders in the space. And that's really what, you know, I saw I saw that it was missing. And everybody I talked to, that's the one thing that I've been very fortunate to have, is a lot of smart people around me, to where, you know, if I see something, I'm like, is it just me? And then everybody else confirming that that piece is missing, and then be able to tackle it. But a lot of the stuff we did, man, it's like we Forrest Gumped it into this position, but we were onto something. And that's what's really, really cool about it. You know, I never, like I said, in a million years, I never thought I'd be invited to the places I'm invited to talk about solutions, or what is your take? Are Walk to Talk America having a take on something and it being so valuable to behavioral health, suicide prevention? I never would have thought we were here.
What were the early challenges like those first year or two from like 2018 to 2020?
That was the toughest time because it was like convincing two sides. Like people don't realize, like I didn't come out of the gate being beloved by the gun industry. I thank God I had people in my corner that had known me from distribution days and importing days, right? So they knew that I didn't have like an ulterior motive, right? So they would listen, but it's separate than the business side of it. There's the culture side of it. There's all the people on Instagram. There's all the people on Facebook that, are in the 2A community. The toughest part was basically saying, I want to put these two sides together, but I want to do it in a way where it respects both sides. And it's not name calling, or it's not telling gun people, yeah, you need to come off your stance. Like you need to lighten up. And, so that was the toughest part, is just basically like those first 2 years was just convincing both sides to listen to what I was saying. Whereas, as it got, I think we just did something recently where I had said, like, you finally see it turning a corner where I'm walking down halls now and people are just like, good job, man, or keep up the good work. Whereas before it's like guns and mental health. Like, what is this dude doing? Like, why is he walking up to this line and playing around? This doesn't even seem like it should happen. So that's the big difference.
Yeah, I'm sure the early days were rough. You thought you had it all, not all figured out, but you had the vision of, all right, we're going to fundraise money and then help fund these initiatives. And then you have to be that initiative and you have to provide the solutions because they're not just there waiting for funding.
Yeah. And there's also too, like, I know my intention and there's a million people that don't know my intention. So it's like, I got to convince people now to buy into what I'm saying. And I had people that are kind of like, yeah, I see the problem, but I still don't know what you're doing or how you're doing it, or what you want to do. And a lot of the things that we accomplished, Kevin, we didn't even we fell into them, like saying, okay, that's the cool thing about being nimble and not having red tape, and just saying like, okay, there's a hole, let's fill it. Or there's a mountain, let's go around it. Or let's figure out a solution where everybody wins, right? And I feel like the biggest takeaway from what Walk the Talk America has brought to both sides of this argument is hope. You have people from the firearm side saying like, yeah, this is cool. Like, we finally have a place where we can sit at this table and talk about these things and not feel dirty about it and provide solutions and be proud of our side. Then you have this other side that's like, wow, I never really thought the firearms industry was paying this much attention or cared. And now I'm seeing that I got to think about this in a different light and see that there are companies out there that are putting customers first over just a sale. I had a great meeting today with Ruger, and I want to highlight them just because in this meeting today, they absolutely do not beat their chest and want anything in return for what they do. They do it because it's the right thing to do. And it's crazy how much I try to offer, like, we'd like to do this to spotlight you and highlight all the things you're doing for just the gun community, mental health, and programs like Kids to Kings. And they're like, we don't want that. You do it. If you want to do it, you can do it. But we're not in it for this. And I think, I try to tell them, I'm not doing this to brag to other gun people. I'm doing this to show the rest of the country that looks at us sideways that we do more than you. That's just as important to me. But anyways, I think it just gives people hope.
Days like today give you energy where What the Talk America is now. What gave you energy in those early years when there were so many obstacles and mountains that you had to move around based off your early perceptions of, oh, we're going to do this, and then figuring out, oh, we can't just do this, we have to build it, or all those other challenges?
And I'll tell you what, there is always something good that would happen through all the bullshit and through all we're getting down to our last dollar here. Like, Mike's got to drive Uber. There is always something good that would happen, whether it's just like getting a call from an organization that's really impressed and wants to learn more, being invited to speak at a function, or just a gun owner reaching out and being like, you guys saved my life. right? It's these like little things that you can get excited about that pull you back in, that give you purpose. I was talking to Caleb Morse at SHOT Show. He owns a gun shop in Louisiana. And I remember he's like, everybody needs a purpose. And that was a really cool way of framing it, because my whole thing was helping people becomes a drug. It sounds like we're all cokeheads, but it's true. Like you do, when you have something that helps people and you see how it affects them in a positive light, it's like a drug. You get high on it and you don't want to leave it. Especially when you know you're on to something. People ask me all the time, like, when was that moment like that you realize like you're on to something? And I truly believe it was, in the very beginning, being at Edgar Antillone's event in Colorado, and literally talking to the crowd and talking about what I had envisioned, and just getting the stories of people that have been affected by suicide or mental health and felt like they had nowhere to turn to. Being at SHOT Show and passing out wristbands and literally having people like come up to the booth, like my gun booth, not even the Walk the Talk America booth at that time, and sharing stories and tearing up, crying, or having strangers be like, can I just give you a hug? You know what I mean? Like I was just like, okay, I'm on to something. And those are the things that keep you going. If you believe in something, you'll figure out a way to make it work, or you'll die trying. And I'm a big believer in that now, especially after all this, just because I know what we all sacrificed to get where we're at now. Everybody, from you to Jake, to Kevin Dixie, to Devin Perkins, to all the other people. I mean, I'm leaving out, a lot of people that don't realize like their willingness to stick with this and believe in it and help it, however they were doing it, whether it was an in-kind donation, a financial donation, or put me to work. What do you need me to do? You sacrificing, right? Everybody sacrificing their time. I mean, putting energy into this as if it was another full-time job. I can't express my gratitude enough for everything that everyone's done, So that's what keeps me going, man. And I feel like I have to give that back to people too. Like when they believe in me, I literally become like a kid who wants validation from his dad, I'm like, I want you to know I'm out there doing the work, and I'm actually like proud of it. And I want you to be proud of it. You know what I mean? And sometimes I think I bother people with that shit, because they're always like, yeah, man, we love what you're doing. And I'm like, no. I need you to understand everything that's cool that's happening. And it's because of your help. So it's funny.
What were the dark times of Uber like? And let's try to put that on the timeline. That was what we did the Oregon training, right? And had some kind of momentum around the cultural competence courses with the mental health clinicians, but then the finances weren't there and you were forced to turn to Uber. Is that kind of how it weighed out on the timeline?
Yeah. And I remember getting a call from our CFO, Dustin Jones from Armscore, and Dustin saying, hey man, you got about 2 weeks of operating left. And which means I couldn't take a salary. And I was taking at the time, like it was a joke. Like I couldn't even pay my rent with the salary I was taking. So, I was like, all right, I don't want to give up on this. I want to keep going. I need to do something to where I'm not, because the crazy thing about this job, this position, this organization is you have to be nimble, like, because something might fall into your lap, a project might fall into your lap, or an opportunity might fall into your lap, or an interview might fall into your lap at any time. So, for me, driving rideshare made the most sense because I can make my hours out of it. And if I was driving and something came up and they're like, hey, Mike, can you meet in an hour? I could at least get home. It's not like a job where I'm working, bagging groceries and it's just like, I can't tell the boss I'm leaving. So like they were dark times, but like I wouldn't, it's dark in the sense that you're not where you want to be and you're doing something that you feel like you could be contributing more. You have to kind of understand that you're sacrificing for the bigger picture and you really don't have a plan B. Like to me, the making it work, driving ride or driving Uber, that was part of plan A. That's just continuing it. Like plan B to me is pivoting, going somewhere completely different, right? Going to work for a manufacturer or going into a totally different industry. But it helped me also realize that my life wasn't so bad, right? I've said this before when I talk about the Uber days. Like, it was therapeutic for me to be able to kind of like get on the road, have somebody get in my car, and then they could have had the worst day of their life, or maybe their best day of their life, but they're sharing that story with me and I can listen. And also too, just like when people were curious about me and they would ask like, hey, do you like driving Uber? And, you know, I wanted to turn around and be like, no, as soon as I drop you off, I'm going to kill my high school guidance counselor. But, you know, like kind of making those jokes but then telling them about Walk Talk America and why I'm doing this. And this is kind of my side hustle. Seeing the respect that commanded, like, you know, a lot of people were like, man, I'm rooting for you. I hope you do well. You know, here's me being like, well, I was already at the White House, but, you know, those are all great positive things. Like I wouldn't change the experience for the world because I feel like it really adds another layer to the story that people can appreciate. You know, I can look someone in the face and literally be like, you know, I don't see you sacrificing enough for what you want to chase. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. You know what I mean? But I did it and I walked it and I lived it. I went from making hundreds of thousands of dollars as an executive, you know, got lucky, family business, all that stuff, to making nothing and working for free. And if you're not ready to sacrifice like that, and maybe you can't, that's understandable too. But if you're not ready to make that sacrifice and you can make the sacrifice, like you can do it, then you don't really want it if you don't do it.
What shifted the momentum around? Like you said, you were just speaking at the White House and then you're going backwards. You're spending time driving Uber. I remember there were some phone calls where you'd be trying to get something done, whatever it was back then. You'd be like, oh, sorry, someone's about to hop in my car for a ride. Got to talk later. What was the turnaround point?
The turnaround came with the support of the industry, to be honest. Like it was a financial thing, right? Because we need to be able to pay to keep this. You got to be, when you have an organization like this, you got to be able to pay yourself and whoever else you need to pay. But you also have to be able to pay for the programs. You know, that was the cool thing about Walk Talk America at the time, because I really did look at it and say, okay, there could still exist without someone running it with some of the things we have. It just would be a shell of what it could be, right? Like we'd always have the website up there talking about responsible gun ownership and things like that. And, you know, it's just some of the things that we had, but you wouldn't have the advocacy piece. You wouldn't have the consulting stuff. You wouldn't have any of the other stuff that goes with it, the appearances, all the things and the day-to-day, the creating the content and getting the message in front of people. But it really was companies like Armscore and Ruger and NASGW and Davidson's, Chattanooga. You know, I know I'm forgetting people, which is going to bug me later, but people saying like, I believe in you. We're going to chip this in, right, to make it possible. So that was the turnaround. People ask me all the time about business, and it's hard for me to answer that question because I've gotten really lucky and I've had people believe in me, whether it was just the Eagle days, like selling guns, or this. So I'm not going to sit here and tell somebody that I know what I'm doing or I know what's good for you and this is how you do it. I can make recommendations, but there's also this luck that comes into play, you know. But I think the foundation for any person is you have to believe in what you're doing and you have to want it. Like you have to really want it. If you have that as your foundation, then it's easier to get it done. Yeah. If it wasn't for the firearms industry, this doesn't exist. It doesn't work out.
Before we shift to maybe a little bit of questions of who you are and the core of you, is there any other piece of kind of Walk the Talk's journey? I feel like more people are updated of the recent stuff to where that gets them caught up to a lot of the blind spots. But is there any other piece on the Walk the Talk, building it and the journey that you want to touch on that you haven't?
No, nothing that pops into my head. Of course, you know, when we talk privately, I'm going to remember. I should have said that on the podcast, but there really isn't anything about the journey. The journey is awesome. We're trying to do our best now to go back and document this journey. And like, it's like putting that timeline together that we did for SHOT Show. I mean, that was sort of a challenge, right? Because it's like you have a finite amount of space to put on this timeline. Like, what do you want to highlight? But we've had some amazing experiences and opportunities, and they just keep growing. And I think like for this type of messaging to finally come out of the firearms industry and not be controlled, the narrative be controlled by people that we just don't agree with fundamentally when it gets down to gun rights, I think it's really special. I think the impact we had on gun culture, or we have on gun culture, that's something that should be highlighted. There wasn't a lot of this going on before we started it. You had some suicide prevention stuff here and there, but this really became kind of a movement. You know, I'm going to be afforded the opportunity to speak at an event, which I never would have thought I'd speak at. And one of the people who was running the event said to me, "We theme this year is unity, and we think you're the perfect guy to kick it off as a keynote speaker." And I look at that and I go, the fact that they are reaching out to a gun industry dude, a gun guy, to promote unity, that shows you how far we've come and what we've accomplished. It speaks for itself.
Now let's get to your question that you ask every guest, but let's twist it a little bit. How do you stay mentally healthy now, and how has that evolved and maybe improved over the years?
So doing what I love helps me stay mentally healthy. This helps me stay mentally healthy. But that's an easy answer. Like that's the easy answer. Being in this situation and being close to people that work in this space and being close to people that are affected by mental health, I think it's made me a better person. It's made me stop and pause and look at every situation and wonder about, you know, what is the mental health of this person? Or, you know, I'm just more aware of a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have been back in the day, or probably wouldn't have cared about. You know, I look at just life completely different, and I'm happy that I'm here. I'm happy that I'm doing things like this that kind of document for my daughters, because I'm not going to be around forever. And one day they're going to want to be able to look back at things and they're able to say like, hey, my father was involved in this and this was really important to him. I think that really helps me mentally. Also too, man, like, not for nothing, and there's nothing wrong with like literally exiting the earth, like selling guns or selling products, but to be able to contribute to society and then be able to contribute to a community like the Second Amendment community, and the Second Amendment, something that I really hold near and dear to my heart, that really helps me mentally. Not that, like I said, there was anything wrong with what I did before this, and I could have gone the rest of my life and been philanthropic and helped people and been a good friend and been a good father and, you know, donated to charities, because that's another way to do it. But actually doing something, working with it, it gives me like a peace of mind. It's good for my soul.
What single place or whatever, it's an event you spoke at that you've been recently, would the 10, 20-year-old Mike be most shocked at learning that he accomplished?
If I'm going off recent history, it'd have been the research conference in Seattle for harm reduction of firearms. I know I am not that smart to be in a room with those people. No, it is what it is, man. Like I absolutely know that I am not on the intellectual level of the people in that room. And to be able to be in that room and be respected, that was something that really helped me. Like I was really proud of that, right? Because I think intelligence shouldn't always be measured by your SAT score or, you know, how smart you are. But to be able to kind of like move in that space and then have the attention of those people to like, here's a platform, man. We want to hear you talk. Okay, you just said something totally bizarre to us, but we can see it, or never thought about it, right? Like I love that. So, you know, if we're talking recent, that accomplishment and that acceptance that I got from that research community, to be able to kick that door down and be like, hey, guess what? I'm not the only one who's like me. there's like a million gun people right behind me that have the same attitude that I do. We're not going to compromise, but we can play nice at the playground and we can play with each other's ideas in a gentle, loving way. To me, that's something I'm super proud of. I think it's super special, and I think we need to see more of it. We are so divided in this world today, whether it's politics, just everything, right? To be able to like be that guy to bring these two worlds together. So it's like bringing guns to mental health, bringing guns to suicide prevention, bringing guns to research, right? And when I say guns, I mean the people, the community. Right? Not actually, that's a great sound clip for any anti-gun person. All Mike Sidini wants to do is bring guns to but bringing our community to these places and sharing forums and talking, I think that's something I'll always be proud of.
All right, get your magic wand out. I feel like we sometimes say, what would your be one wish of what would you like to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years if you could wave your magic wand? And let's see if 10 years from now, Michael Sodini, we'll see how close you get to that.
If I had a magic wand, I'd be able to put together a dream team of people that I already pretty much know who I would pick on my team. I'm not going to get into that, right? Because that does no good until this comes true. And we'll see one day if it does. I would have my team put together to where we're comfortable, right? We don't have to worry about chasing money to make sure that we can do what we want to do, but also be able to provide for our families. And we're not talking about a lot of money, so it's very possible. But that's where I want to be in the next 5 to 10 years. I want to have like Kids to Kings National. I want to have what we do with the Armory Project National. I want us to be the center of that. When it comes to the conversation about responsible gun ownership and safe gun safety, I want us to be the leaders in that space. I want us to control the narrative. I want us to have all the programs, and not for anything more than I know we'll do it right. And I know we have the best interests at heart for everybody. We are never going to violate people's 2A rights. We're just going to create a society where there are more mentally healthy gun owners out there. And it starts with you own a gun, you are mentally healthy, and it's important. And you don't have to look any further than that gun in the industry and the community to get the support you need. So that's what I want. I want to have my dream team of people that I know have the drive and the intensity and the passion for this, and work with those people. Because like Doge and like Elon, and I don't necessarily think they're handling it the best way, but I see a lot of bullshit in this. And there's a small group of people that I respect. And if I can get them on the Walk the Talk America team, and they don't have to work with red tape, the stuff that they're all handcuffed with, and we can bring them here, I can only imagine what we can accomplish. Because look at what we've accomplished in 6 years with being nimble, not having a lot of money, and no red tape.
I'm turning back over to you. Take us home, however you want to wind up this conversation, whether it's one last message or however you want to do it.
I'm going to stick with the guns and mental health are not mutually exclusive, everybody. And I hope me giving you a peek inside of like my journey helps you appreciate the organization a little bit more. I think we're on the verge of really breaking out. You can feel it. I think this is super important. Once again, there will come a day when there'll be another industry using the firearms industry as an example of how we got ahead of negative firearm outcomes, right? Just like I say, how the alcohol got ahead of DUIs, we're going to do it. I am convinced of that. And I think that will be a case study for other industries that pop up in the future when it comes to AI, everything. I want to be part of that narrative. I want to be part of that conversation. I want people to look at us as a positive example of what the firearms industry and the 2A community accomplished to reduce negative outcomes of firearms. So we'll wrap it up there. I thank everybody for listening. But I'm a guest on your show today, so you bring us home.
Well, we can't do this without all of the sponsors. You've mentioned some. We might have forgot them. So check them out on the Walk the Talk America website, WTTA.org. see all the amazing organizations that help support us, that allow us to have these conversations like this, the amazing guests, and everything else we do. And we hope you have a good day and catch us next time.